I'm Jordana Siegel. As Kim mentioned, I lead cybersecurity and data protection policy, and I'm so delighted to be here with all of you this morning with this amazing group of panelists that we have for this discussion. Just in the last session, we were talking about the rapid deployment of AI and how to do that in a responsible fashion. And as we're thinking about deploying AI, or frankly, any other technology, and especially in the public sector, we really also have to focus on the security dimension, as Kim was just mentioning. And just as our technologies are rapidly evolving, so too are our adversaries' approaches. And that's why we really have to have it's so critical to focus on cybersecurity, and particularly on the human dimension. But before we get into a discussion about cybersecurity and the human dimension and the culture of security, I'd like to briefly introduce each of our panelists today. First, Avery Alpha is the Principal Deputy Undersecretary for Intelligence and Analysis at the Department of Homeland Security. And as part of the intelligence community, Avery's office is responsible for providing intelligence and information to DHS components and external stakeholders to help keep the country safe, secure, and resilient. And she has over 2 decades of experience in national security, having held roles at the CIA and the National Security Council. Jake Braun is the Acting Principal Deputy National Cyber Director in the Office of the National Cyber Director at the White House. It's ONCD for short. And prior to joining the White House, Jake served as the Senior Counselor to the Secretary of Homeland Security. And before coming to government, he led as an Executive Director the Cyber Policy Initiative at the University of Chicago's Harris School of Public Policy, and he's also an award-winning author. And of course, Steve Schmidt is Amazon's Chief Security Officer and frankly leads all things security for the company. Steve joined Amazon in 2008 and then served as Chief Information Security Officer at AWS from 2010 to 2022, where I've had the pleasure of working with Steve. And prior to coming to Amazon, Steve also had an extensive career in the government, working in various senior roles at the FBI. So obviously a lot of incredible expertise here on the stage with us today, and looking forward to the discussion. So to set the stage, I think we'd like to hear a little bit more about the state of cybersecurity and the threat landscape. And Jake, I'd really love to start with you to ask you how, from an ONCD perspective, you're seeing the state of cybersecurity. Just last month, your office published for the first time ever a new report on cybersecurity posture of the US. So I'd love for you to share some trends with us and any highlights from the report you'd like to share.
Sure, thanks. And thanks, Jordana, and thanks, AWS, for putting this together and putting together such a great event. We're really happy to be here and be able to engage with all you folks. So first off, I kind of want to start at the beginning for us, which was the stand-up of our office. It was created in 2019 by a bipartisan act of Congress, and our first employee, Chris Inglis, was hired in the fall of 2021. From there, our first tasking from the president was to write a national cyber strategy, which we did. And then subsequent to that, and the reason I was brought in, was we had to put together a program to implement the strategy. And so we spent all last year running an implementation program of the national cyber strategy, which touched really kind of every aspect of American life that cyber touches, which is every aspect of American life. And so now we're on version 2.0 of that, and as part of launching 2.0, we were also tasked by the President and Congress to put out a report on the status of cybersecurity in the United States. And we, in doing that, identified a handful of trends that seemed particularly relevant for this group. One is, of course, AI, which we'll come back to, I think, later in this talk. 2 is the importance of supply chain security to cyber, and how cyber is now so deeply involved in supply chain security, both in terms of the security of the cyber supply chain, so the security of code and all that other stuff, but also cybersecurity's impact of the physical supply chain around the world. Secondly, there's been a significant increase in spyware, commercial use of spyware that we find to be concerning. And then subsequent to that, ransomware obviously is another thing that is, plaguing our society and so many others. And in ways that, certainly when I was in the Obama administration, I don't think we even envisioned things like ransomware hitting our public schools, hitting water utilities, and things that we normally would think would be off limits, hospitals and things like that. And then subsequent, and obviously a follow-on to that is critical infrastructure. So what were, things, again, I remember in the Obama administration, I was talking to a friend of mine when we were really starting to think about the smart grid. So again, this is back in 2009 and 10 and so on, and I had just started working on cyber at DHS, and I was like, how much do you guys talk about cybersecurity? He's like, it has never come up in one meeting. Nowadays, if you talk about the smart grid, you can't not talk about cyber. But areas that, like in critical infrastructure today, that maybe we weren't talking about cyber 10 years ago, like water and so on, it is beginning to be the case that you can't talk about water utilities without talking about cyber as well. And so really seeing that evolution of cyber kind of creeping into all aspects of critical infrastructure. Yep. So I'll pause there.
No, thank you for that. That's a really good overview, and certainly we have seen that evolution over the last decade plus, and it's continuing to evolve daily. And actually, Avery, I think from your point of view in the intelligence community, what are the most significant changes you've seen sort of in the threat landscape over the last couple of years, and how do you see cyber threats evolving today?
Yeah, so first also, thank you for having me. It's great to be part of the discussion and lift up some of the great work that we're doing at DHS Intel. So let me first start with a little bit more granularity on what we're seeing in the threat landscape when it comes to critical infrastructure, because that's really the bread and butter of what we're looking at DHS Intel in this space. So we have a diverse range of concerns here, from nation-state actors to hacktivists to cyber criminal organizations. And we're seeing activity where people are trying to be disruptive in their attacks, pre-position for future advantage in event of conflict, and then obviously, try to make profit. Now the motivations are also diverse, and I'll unpack some of the political motivations behind these moves. But the methods that we're seeing, of course, there's some very targeted, sophisticated events happening, but at the same time, most of what we see is actually quite unsophisticated targets that are less tailored and more opportunistic. So really low-hanging fruit, like taking advantage of default passwords that haven't been changed, 111 passwords, patches that should have been implemented. Your really basic cybersecurity hygiene, which even to me as a layman is, that's the area of my organization. I want to make sure even my less technical person is 100% comfortable with taking these measures. Now, when we're looking at some of the specific threat actors, I'll just touch briefly on China, Iran, and Russia, because they're all very concerning in this space. So Chinese actors, we've seen their hackers really penetrate our critical infrastructure in a concerning way and across multiple sectors. So water is obviously discussed a lot, the electric grid, transportation as well. And this is one of those cases where clearly the mounting tension over the future of Taiwan and potential conflict there is a motivation here. And this is one of those examples of pre-positioning for future use. Now, when we're looking at Iran, we're seeing a motivation from the ongoing Gaza conflict. And since the outset of that, we've seen targeting of Israeli-manufactured US-based industrial control systems in our critical infrastructure because they're Israeli. And so that we've seen just to deface and make the political message. So not so much disrupting and having a significant impact, but just showing the ability to access and potential for greater concern over time. And that we've seen addressing the water, wastewater, food and beverage, commercial, manufacturing sectors. I mean, really getting across the lay of the land there. And then briefly, I wanted to touch on Russia as well. So they remain very interested in penetrating state and local networks in addition to federal. And I highlight state and local because, again, that is where our rubber meets the road for DHS Intel. We exist really to strengthen our state and local partners and push down intel from the federal intelligence community to help them mitigate where the rubber meets the road, and then push up their insights back into the community. So we're, again, concerned about any kind of penetration at the lowest hanging fruit point and informing them about how they could make their cyber hygiene better. One last point on the human element of vulnerabilities here. We really see more and more sophisticated spear phishing campaigns, and they're targeting employees' egos, greed, motivations. You don't look any better over here today than you did yesterday to certain audiences. So there's a significant human angle on both sides of why the adversaries are coming at us at the beginning of the day and how we're vulnerable amongst some of our employees on staff. So we're trying to look holistically at that. In terms of where things are moving, generative AI, I think we're going to get into in a little bit more detail. So I'll just preview, we're just concerned about as an amplifying effect, although there's certainly many great things about it as well. The Chinese living off the land techniques make it very difficult to disrupt and to find and then actually fully mitigate the problems that we see. And then the last point I would say is the increase in criminal hacktivist activity has also been concerned to us as an emerging trend because it's so much harder to deter. Nation states in the cybersecurity realm understand the risk calculus and what they might be triggering when they make some of these moves. The cyber criminal actors, they have totally different motivations, and you just can't deter them in the same way.
Thank you so much for that. You really highlighted, I think, the spectrum that we're dealing with, from some of the very basic to some of the much more advanced. And I'm sure, Steve, a lot of that, what both Jake and Avery mentioned, resonate with you from an Amazon point of view. I know Amazon has unique insights into malicious activity and threat actors that is relevant to governments and industry as well as the internet as a whole. And so maybe you can share a little bit about, sort of from a private sector point of view, how we're seeing things.
So Avery teed it up nicely. We've seen some changes in the way actors behave because of the use of AI, and this we'll start to get into the guts here of what's going on. And one of the things that's really interesting to note is something Avery said about targeted phishing attacks and getting better over time. AI is actually one of the enablers there. The reason is that you've had a lot of actors who may not have been expert in the English language, as an example, but because they can use AI tools to craft more effectively targeted messages at particular sectors, at particular people, at particular companies, they're more believable and they're more actionable by the victim as a result. And so we've seen better manipulation, better campaigns to gain access to things, more effective use of AI. This is not AI attacking other systems. This is AI enabling people who already go after systems to do so more effectively. And that has a big effect in areas like the geopolitical sphere as well, where you're either trying to build an influence campaign or you're attempting to gain access to systems to control, for example, logistics trains. And in that, the use of AI tools allows the actors, again, to be more effective at their process of developing the things that get people to click on that link that we wish they wouldn't have. Or to say, you know what, the message they're conveying here actually does make sense to me when they're going through and reading something. Malware as a service is something, of course, that continues to trend. It used to be that malware actors built stuff for their own use. They built it so they could go after ransomware activities, et cetera. Part of the amplification we've seen in ransomware activity is malware as a service being put into action, where some of these builders have realized that they can monetize the tooling that they've built across a larger number of actors by giving them basically a percentage back on things that they get from ransomware. The other part about that is, as Avery was pointing out, the enforcement process against some of these actors is very, very hard. They used to be in places where they didn't have the expertise in order to build the tools, but now with ransomware as a service, they can buy the tools from somebody else and take advantage of that. Now, Jordana was mentioning that we see an interesting set of things across AWS and across Amazon. And one of the fun things about being in my position is that we do see an incredibly broad spectrum of what goes on in the world. A lot of businesses focus on, I'm in the banking vertical, I'm in the water sector, those sorts of things. And they're concerned about the activities that they can see from their perspective. One of the unique advantages that we have is that we have an incredibly broad selection of customers. which means that that incredibly broad selection of customers sees lots of people trying to attack them. But that allows us to build tooling which can defend not only that one group of customers, but the customers as a whole. Just some interesting statistics. We've got a set of global honeypots that my team runs, and we pick up about 100 million interactions every single day with those honeypots. So those are adversaries who are trying to break into systems. They think they're going after actual computers on networks, but they're actually going after our sensor systems. And it's incredible how quickly the adversaries discover new infrastructure components bring up. We actually use that as part of our tooling to determine how quickly we have to react as a company when adversaries are attacking. And unfortunately, it's down to minutes is the time between something being exposed on the internet and adversaries attacking it here. And the question is, all right, you've been alerted to an attack. What do you do? We built some tooling internally, which we make the results of available to customers now, which significantly changes the calculus for attacks. The internal tool is called Sonaris. We've talked about it a little bit publicly recently. But over the past 12 months, we've denied about 24 billion attempts by adversaries to look at our customers' S3 buckets, to enumerate them, and prevented nearly 2.6 trillion attempts by adversaries to exploit our customers' EC2 instances. And what I mean by prevent is that we actually divert the adversary's traffic or block it entirely without the customer having to do anything at all. And this is one of those areas where scale really does make a difference in being able to protect customers over time.
Just the statistics are just staggering. When the trillion, I always have to stop and like take a breath because it's just staggering. But I'm really glad that you started talking about some of what we're doing already to deal with this threat landscape that you've all just described so well. And now I want to talk about what organizations, including government and industry, some of what Steve was just mentioning, are doing, can be doing, and should be doing to adapt to these evolving technologies in this dynamic threat landscape and secure their organizations. And so Avery, I understand within intelligence and analysis at DHS, you've been working on some different pilot programs to deploy new technology securely. And I wondered if you could share with our audience here a little bit about how that's going, if there's any lessons learned, any takeaways that you might offer in terms of how others can think about securely deploying new technology.
Sure. So we're trying to lean forward in this space as much as we can while preserving the security necessary in a classified environment, but arming our employees wherever they are in the best way that we can. So one thing we're rolling out are secret level classified laptops, which, as you know, are not new in the DoD realm of space, but it is new to my workforce. So this is really valuable for my field presence. We have collection officers and partnership-focused officers across the country, embedded in every fusion center, focused on that state and local customer set. So this really enables better connectivity back to the broader intelligence community and back to us, so we can talk to them about more sensitive things. So that's something we're particularly eager to roll out this year. We're also implementing the hybrid multi-cloud environment on our classified systems, which is already in motion and we're very happy to have, and zero trust security. So multi-factor authentication, no surprises there, but that's a space that we're working in now.
Great. And Jake, I know there's a number of priorities that have been enumerated in the National Cybersecurity Strategy, and you're working actively to implement those priorities, as you've talked about a little bit before, across the federal government and also with stakeholders across the board as well. Can you talk a little bit about what you're focusing on with respect to the federal government and sort of how you're trying to raise the bar across the federal enterprise?
Sure. So there's a few things where we're maybe not looking at specific technologies, but kind of broad technological changes that we want ourselves and hopefully then by extension industry and so on to make. First off, it starts with BGP security. So by the way, that's BGP, not BJP, the Indian political party, two totally different things. So BGP, for those of you who know, is one of the key foundational parts of the internet. It was really not built to be secure. And so we have an internal program, actually ran out of our office, so we haven't actually delegated this down to the agencies to try and move the whole federal government into RPKI systems. And what we've been told by the folks who know a lot about these things, and I guess, it's funny, you find these little like microcosms of people who are experts about these things you've never heard of, and this is no different. It's like I couldn't spell BGP when we started this, and now I found out there's this whole subculture of BGP experts out there. But anyway, so these people tell us that if the federal government, particularly a few key agencies, and you can think of what the big ones are, move into RPKI, it'll have a dramatically outsized impact on the security of the entire internet, and then hopefully will help incentivize others in industry to do the same. And so that's something that, again, we're tracking directly out of our office. We have certain staff who are literally down to the level of working out contract language for different agencies to help them move over to that. And so, really encouraging everybody in this room to think about that for their own organizations. And then secondly, some of you who follow us on the White House website may have noticed that we put out a paper earlier in the year on calling for a move to memory-safe programming and formal methods. And we're really working across the interagency to incentivize memory-safe programming languages. That's even tied to things that DARPA's funding in terms of research and so on and so forth, as well as working with contracting officers to try and include that type of language for prioritizing memory-safe programming languages and formal methods into the things we buy as well. So those are kind of two big kind of programmatic technological shifts that we're trying to move the federal government into over the course of the next few years. Tactically, though, one of the things we're really excited about and hoping continues to evolve in a positive way is the next evolution of CDM. So the Continuous Diagnostics and Mitigation Program ran out of DHS. I was actually on the team that helped create that back in the Obama administration. When it's funny, initially it was going to be called Continuous Diagnostics and Monitoring. And our boss, then Deputy Secretary James Lute, was like, absolutely not. We're not calling anything that we're doing across civilian infrastructure monitoring. It's mitigation. So we're mitigating things. But anyway, as we all know, anybody who's been involved in that BPA, it's had its fits and starts over the years. But it's I think, as Churchill said about democracy, it's the worst option except for everything else. And so it really is something that we've seen be, the kind of shared services model for the federal civilian space. And as that evolves over time, we're hoping to see it grow in its sophistication and so on keeping our agencies secure. So those are three of the big things we're focused on.
Those are fantastic. I actually remember those conversations about mitigation and monitoring from my time at DHS. And I think actually the examples you provided about BGP and formal methods and software security generally are really great examples of public-private partnership as well, because those processes that you're running invite contributions from the private sector, and we've had an opportunity to contribute and really glad to see those moving ahead. And Steve, I know at Amazon we talk a lot about the importance of culture as kind of fundamental to everything we do in security. And so I was wondering if you could share a little bit about that aspect and sort of how that looks at Amazon and how others can be thinking about that in their own organizations.
So one of the fun things about my job is I'm an engineer, but the most interesting part of my job is not the technical. We hear a lot about what are the tools that we need to do, how do we need to change the techniques that we use, how do we employ appropriate encryption, authentication, authorization, et cetera. But all of these are symptoms of sets of problems which are people-based. And a lot of people forget that the computer security, cybersecurity, is not a technical thing. At least currently, machines don't attack each other. It is a situation where there's a person who determines they want to do something for a reason. Those people are usually motivated by one of four things. In the classic espionage sense, it would have been money, ideology, coercion, or ego. I say we should remove the coercion part pretty much right now and think more about influence, since influence actions are increasingly an important part of the ability to break into systems. But we have to understand what is in our adversaries' heads. What are they trying to achieve? What is their risk tolerance? What kind of expertise do they have? Where do they get their tools from? How do they employ them? What are the actions that they take when they discover something? What is their speed of action? All of these influence the way we build defenses. And defenses are sets of tools, their processes, their procedures, ultimately their mechanisms that allow us to ensure that we have the right level of visibility, the right level of inspection, and the right level of control, to the point about mitigation as opposed to monitoring. It's all well and good to raise the alarm. What really matters is, what do you do when the alarm goes off? So how does this figure into organizational dynamics? And unlike a lot of companies, I'm the chief security officer for Amazon. I report to the CEO. That is intentional. That is an organizational design specifically intended to influence the prominence of security in an organization. It is something that Andy Jassy, who's currently the CEO of Amazon, decided when he was the CEO of AWS. And he built the security organization reporting directly to him with that intent in mind. Because technical security measures are important, but organizations are made up of people. And we have numerous examples in the news, unfortunately, of where deficient security cultures lead to unfortunate outcomes. And it is building the right culture starts from the top. Is the boss, his or herself, interested in the security of the organization? Do they represent that through regular interactions with the security team? There is no mistake that I report to the CEO because of organizational dynamics. The people building tools, operating the organization, realize that if they disagree with something that the security organization says, there's one stop above it. So we always have to be able to work out what is the right thing to do for our customers and to build securely as a result there. So if I would lay out a few things that I think are really important for everybody to take home off of that. Number one is that security needs to be part of the organizational design structure itself, not stuck somewhere in an organization, if you really intend to make it an important part of the way that you do business. Number two, security has to be everybody's job. The security team is there to advise, to assist, to enforce, and also to help build the tools that enable the service teams to deliver what they want. The service teams at Amazon are the people who are responsible for the security of the systems that they deliver to our customers, not the security team. We're there to help them do it. A lot of organizations say, well, this is what security told me, so that's what I'm gonna do, as opposed to saying, what's best for my customers? And that is a design that's intentional across the way that you should practice security. And the last piece is security should not be scaled through human effort. There's two reasons for that. Number one is human beings are notoriously unreliable. They don't do what you want when you want them to do it with the level of precision that you want. We have great, well-intentioned people, but they are humans. They will make mistakes. So you need to build tools and repeatable mechanisms that enforce the behavior that you want across the organization. Number two is, and I think we'll touch on this in a little bit, none of us have enough of them. Amazon's an awesome place to work. We're really, really good at hiring people. We still can't find enough really, really skilled security engineers. If we can't find them, it's a reasonable bet that most other people can't as well. So it's something where we got to focus on building the tools that allow us to scale our security organizations and then have our human beings focus on the most important areas that tools can't manage. That is the incredible gray zone that sits in between decisions, because every decision is something that is conditional. What's going on in the world right now? What is my risk tolerance? What does this particular customer look like? What is my time to detection? How easily can I react? All of those are human understood situations that we got to take and put into tooling eventually, but right now it just doesn't exist.
Thank you for that. We've previewed a little bit that we were going to talk about AI, and I know we're going to be running short on time, but every panel nowadays has to have some discussion about AI, so here it is. Jake, maybe to start with you, President Biden issued a kind of landmark executive order last fall with a lot of tasks for the federal government, working in concert with stakeholders across the board, and implementation is well underway. Can you talk a little bit about what ONCD is really focused on and what you're prioritizing with respect to AI and security?
Sure. I think actually one of the things that's kind of telling on where we are from a policy perspective on AI was the book that just came out from Steve Schmidt and Henry Kissinger, and I forget there was a third author, where, I don't know if any of you have read this, but the main thrust of the book is, please regulate us. We have no idea what we're doing, and we're going to screw everything up if you don't regulate us. But by the way, don't regulate us, because if you do, China will beat us. And so don't regulate us. So that's basically the book.
Thanks
And
for
so
the summary.
I think, and so I think that's kind of, from a policy and a geostrategic position, kind of the dilemma that we're faced with. And so I think what the Biden administration tried to do initially was just kind of demonstrate a level of grip, just grip on the situation in general, knowing that, again, we're the federal government, we're not a bunch of technologists who build AI. And so what we set out to do initially, so putting the text of the EO aside for a second, was three things. Number one, we wanted to get all the major AI companies in a room and say, okay, folks, we need to agree on some principles that we can go tell the American people and the world, for that matter, that we're going to agree to make sure that you all know that we need to make sure AI is a tool for good in our society. And so, of course, look, these people are great Americans. They want to do the right thing. Industry folks came in and said, we're all for that. And then that's where you saw those initial announcements where the AI companies came out with the administration and said what they said. Secondly was to bring our international partners together, and specifically the folks that are on kind of the team democracy side of the equation, the folks who we know care about making sure that, again, AI is a force for good in society and not a force for repression. And so we convened our international allies from across the world in key democracies and so on to say, look, we too are going to strive to ensure that AI is used as a force for good in our countries. So you have kind of the key folks in industry who are developing this stuff, and then the key players from the highest levels of policy across the globe saying, we're all in on this too and understand how important it is. And then separately, and this is kind of where the EO came in, we said, look, since we're the United States, we have to lead by example. We're going to get our own house in order. And so we're going to do a series of things like making sure we have AI officers in place and really looking at how AI affects the policy implications of what each agency does, and so on and so forth. And so I think if you saw the actions that were taken around the EO development, you'll see that really that was all about dealing with this conundrum that came out of the Kissinger book, that I talked about from the Kissinger book, and really necessitated the US to lead and say, we're going to demonstrate that we have some level of grip on this situation. Then separately, so we had to think about what are we talking about when we're talking about cybersecurity and AI. Thing one is we have to make sure that the models don't get out and get into the wrong hands. So how are we securing the models so they don't walk away? Number two, how are we securing the systems that manage the models so people can't inject bad stuff into the models or into those systems so they do bad things? And then finally, how's AI going to be used for offense or defense moving forward? And so those are kind of the three big buckets on how we think about where does cyber intersect with AI. So I'll pause there.
Thank you. I'm just mindful of time, and I know, Avery, you talked a little bit about some of the threats before. So Steve, maybe you could just share with the audience if you have any suggestions that people should be thinking about as there is a company that is both developing the technology and helping customers deploy it. Some takeaways for folks in the room.
Three simple takeaways. We've been building AI systems at Amazon for a long time, and we've been asking ourselves the same questions that you should be asking your teams as they build and operate AI systems. Number one is, where is our data? Who has access to it? How is it controlled? How is it anonymized? How is it tokenized? How is that data stored? Who can gain access is the most important thing. Number two, what happens to my query and the associated data that goes with it? Is it used to train the model again? Or is it something that's separate on an individual case basis? Who has access to that data? Because there's an enormous amount of really interesting stuff that gets sent up when people ask queries. And number three, which is an interesting one, is the output of the model accurate enough? We know that these things are not perfect. We know that and that the term of art in the business is hallucinate. And so you have to make sure that the output of the model is actually correct. And do your teams understand how to do that appropriately? Are the models producing annotated output, for example, that says, here's the source, which drew me to this conclusion? Or is it just saying, the sky's purple today? So those are the three things that I think everybody should be taking away and thinking about as they use AI.
Thank you. And I know we're short on time. I feel like we could stay together all day talking about these issues. Maybe just to quickly wrap up, go down the line, and if there's one piece of advice you could share with our leaders in the room regarding the role of people in cybersecurity, would love to hear from each of you. Maybe Avery, starting with you.
Sure. I mean, I would just say prioritize the people. Let's diversify the recruiting pipeline for cybersecurity, but national security broadly, and really infuse this as part of the conversation for the layman as well. Let's upskill our people who already have a baseline, and then let's give everyone who doesn't access to make that baseline and build that technical acumen.
So everything Avery said, and we have to have new on-roads into cyber. You know, 4-year degrees are great, and people should get 4-year degrees, but also we need new on-roads in terms of apprenticeships and so on and so forth to get more people into cyber.
This is a people problem. Our workforce needs to represent those who attack us as well. We need to have a diverse workforce with a bunch of different viewpoints on things, because that'll help us understand the motivations and the actions that our adversaries are going to take.
That was great. Hopefully that resonates with all of you as well. Thank you all so much for being part of this conversation. Give everyone a round of applause.